She let two strangers in during a blizzard, not knowing it was a Mafia boss in his cape. Snow fell in thick, heavy sheets, covering the ground in a frozen blanket and turning the world beyond her windows into a sea of white. The storm had come suddenly, without warning. Roads were already impassable, and even the smallest cottage could not provide safety against the furious blizzard. Isolde pulled her thick woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the cold bite at her skin. Her home, though isolated, was her sanctuary, a quiet place she had built for herself after years of loss and loneliness. The crackling of the fireplace in the large stone hearth was the only sound inside, a soft, golden warmth cutting through the chill. She carried a tray of tea, careful not to spill it, and paused to listen. Something made her stop. At first it was a faint tapping, almost lost in the wind. Then she heard it again, stronger, more insistent. Her heart quickened. At this hour in this storm, no visitor should come. She approached the door cautiously, the snow outside forming small drifts against the wooden frame. Whoever was there could be anyone, and yet something in her chest urged her to look. She opened the door a crack and peered out. Two figures stood in the storm, their faces obscured by scarves and heavy cloaks. Snow clung to their shoulders and their hair was damp and wild. They seemed calm despite the fury of the blizzard. They raised their hands in silent greeting. "Please, we need shelter," one said, his voice low, controlled with a strange authority. Isolde hesitated. Her instincts screamed that strangers could be dangerous, yet the storm outside left no room for argument. Her hand trembled slightly as she stepped aside. "Come in," she said softly. The taller of the two entered first, his presence immediately commanding. Even through the wet fabric and the scarf that partially covered his face, Isolde could sense power in him, a cold, unyielding strength that made her stomach twist in both fear and fascination. Behind him followed a slightly smaller man, quieter but with eyes that seemed to take in everything, sharp and calculating. He moved with the grace of someone trained, disciplined, and careful, yet he carried an intensity that could not be ignored. Isolde quickly ushered them in, shutting the door against the raging storm. The warm air from the fireplace brushed against her cheeks and she shivered. The two men shook off the snow, their movements smooth and deliberate, almost unnervingly precise. "Thank you," the taller one said again, his voice firm but not unkind. "We would have been lost out there." "You're welcome," she replied, trying to steady her voice. She gestured toward the fire. "You can warm yourselves here. I'll make tea." The men sat without protest, their eyes occasionally meeting hers. There was a tension in the room, unspoken yet palpable, a strange electricity that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Isolde poured steaming tea into 3 delicate cups, the aroma of herbs filling the air. She handed one to the taller man first. "Isolde," she said as she set the cup before herself, "I'm glad you're here, but may I ask who you are? What brings you so far from the road?" The man regarded her with a steady gaze, as if weighing whether to reveal a truth that was dangerous and heavy. He finally said, "My name is Vincenzo. This is Rafe, my companion." His eyes met hers, dark and commanding. "We are travelers seeking refuge from the storm." Isolde nodded, feeling a shiver, not entirely from the cold. She noticed the small details, the way shadows seemed to cling to Vincenzo, bending slightly toward him. And Rafe, there was a calm, measured aura about him, as though he was always aware of the smallest change in his surroundings. They drank tea in silence at first. The fire crackled, casting long shadows across the room. Isolde could not help but steal glances at the two strangers. There was something magnetic about Vincenzo, something dangerous but fascinating, like staring too close at a flame. Rafe, on the other hand, was quieter, but she felt his eyes on her whenever she moved. "So you are alone here?" Vincenzo asked suddenly, his tone even but probing. "Yes," she said, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "I prefer it this way." She did not explain the years of solitude, of heartbreak and loss that had brought her to this isolated place. There was a safety in keeping herself a mystery. The storm outside grew louder. The walls of the manor shook under the gusts, and the wind seemed almost alive, clawing at the windows and doors. Vincenzo leaned back slightly, watching the flames in the hearth. There was a subtle shift in the room, as though the shadows themselves listened to him. "I can feel the storm," he said softly, almost to himself. "It's unusual." Isolde frowned, confused. "The snow?" "No," he said, turning to her, eyes glinting. "Something else. Something restless." Rafe's hand twitched near the fire poker, his posture tense. He was always watching, always alert. "The storm is strong," he said finally, "but what Vincenzo feels is older, darker. You should stay near the fire, Miss Isolde." Her heart skipped. There was a weight in the room now, a presence beyond the ordinary. She sensed danger, yes, but also a strange pull, a curiosity that made her unable to look away from Vincenzo. He moved slightly closer, his expression unreadable, and yet there was an intensity in his gaze that both frightened and fascinated her. "Why did you come to me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Vincenzo's lips curved slightly, a faint smile that did not reach his eyes. "Perhaps fate guided us," he said. His voice carried a weight, a power she could almost feel pressing against her chest. "Or perhaps the storm." The words sent a shiver down her spine. She wondered if he spoke figuratively or if the storm truly had some supernatural meaning. The fire flickered, and for a moment she could swear she saw shadows moving independently of the men. Rafe, always alert, noticed her glance. He leaned slightly forward and his deep voice broke the silence. "There are things in the world that cannot be explained," he said. "And sometimes, the people we meet are not who they seem to be." Isolde swallowed hard. She felt like a moth drawn to flame, yet the fire in the room seemed to reflect something darker, something dangerous, about the two strangers she had let in. Still, she could not turn them away. Her sense of compassion, though cautious, demanded it. Hours passed. The storm showed no sign of abating. Snow piled high against the windows, drifts forming like frozen waves. The three sat by the fire, sharing stories carefully, measuring every word. Vincenzo spoke rarely, his presence alone commanding the space. Rafe's sharp eyes never left Isolde, protective yet watchful of his companion. And through it all, the subtle tension in the room grew, a fragile electric thread woven between them. It was impossible to ignore. Isolde felt her pulse quicken whenever Vincenzo's gaze lingered, and she sensed Rafe's quiet presence at her side, always close but never overstepping. Suddenly, the candlelight flickered violently. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched and bent, moving as though alive. Isolde's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Vincenzo, whose expression had stiffened. A faint glow pulsed along his hand, almost imperceptibly, yet enough to make the hairs on her arms rise. What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Vincenzo's gaze was fixed on the corner of the room, and his voice was low, tense. "Something has followed me here." Rafe moved swiftly, stepping between Isolde and the shadowy corner. "Stay behind me," he said firmly. The room grew colder, and the fire flickered like it struggled to hold back the darkness creeping in. Isolde felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination. She could not look away. The shadow shifted again, forming shapes that seemed almost human but warped, unnatural. It hovered near the walls, drawn to Vincenzo's presence. Isolde felt the pull of the storm, the weight of the unknown pressing against her chest. Vincenzo's eyes met hers, dark and intense. "You did not know who I was," he said softly, "and yet you let us in. That choice may have changed everything." Isolde's heart raced. She did not understand the full meaning of his words, yet she felt their weight. The fire crackled one last time, and the shadows recoiled slightly, as if acknowledging some unseen boundary. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the wind's howl outside. Then Rafe spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "The storm is not the only danger tonight. We must be ready." She had opened her door to strangers, and in doing so she had stepped into a world far larger and far darker than she could have imagined. And in that moment, as the shadows whispered at the edges of the firelight, she realized her life had changed forever. The storm raged outside like a living thing, battering the manor with wind and snow. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing long shadows across the walls, yet the shadows seemed darker tonight, stretching into corners that should have been safe. Isolde could not shake the feeling that the strangers she had welcomed into her home carried secrets far heavier than their appearance suggested. Vincenzo sat near the fire, his hand still glowing faintly, as if some power inside him struggled to remain hidden. He did not speak immediately, but his eyes, dark, piercing, and unreadable, watched Isolde as she moved about the room. There was something in him that seemed both dangerous and fascinating, a power she could feel pressing gently, almost imperceptibly, against the edge of her mind. Rafe, ever watchful, moved with a quiet precision around the room. He adjusted a chair, tidied a small shelf, and ensured the windows were properly sealed against the wind. Yet even as he worked, his sharp eyes remained on her, measuring, calculating. His presence was steady and protective, a stark contrast to Vincenzo's magnetic intensity. "Miss Isolde," Rafe said quietly, finally breaking the silence, "you should know the storm outside is not the only danger tonight." She froze in the middle of the room, holding a tray of cups. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Vincenzo's gaze lifted to hers. "There are forces around us," he said, his voice low and firm. "I carry a curse, one that draws attention from those who are neither human nor kind." The words made Isolde's chest tighten. "A curse," she whispered, unable to hide the tremor in her voice. She felt fear, yes, but also a strange fascination. Somehow, the thought that the stranger she had let in was not ordinary made the world suddenly larger, wilder, and full of impossible possibilities. "Yes," Vincenzo replied, his dark eyes shadowed. "A curse tied to my bloodline, bound long before I was born. It is dangerous, relentless, and it will not rest until it claims what it seeks." Isolde swallowed hard, setting the tray down. She had always lived a life of quiet caution, avoiding danger and trusting only herself. Yet now, with the snowstorm beating against her windows and two strangers in her home, something inside her stirred, a courage she had not known she possessed. I don't know if I understand," she said. "But you're here. You've come to me for help, perhaps." Vincenzo's lips curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. "Perhaps," he said. "Or perhaps fate has brought you here. There is a power in you, Isolde, a strength you may not yet see, a power that can help or harm if left unchecked." She blinked, confused and slightly afraid. "Power me? I live here alone. I've never—" "You have a gift," Rafe interjected softly, "though you may not know it. You carry the kind of magic that can protect, that can heal, and even influence what surrounds you. That is why the curse has taken notice tonight." Isolde felt her heartbeat quicken. Magic, a curse, strangers who glowed with unnatural power. She wanted to refuse the thought entirely, but a deeper part of her knew the truth in Rafe's words. She had always felt different, even in childhood, sensing moments before danger arrived or feeling emotions in the air as if they were her own. Perhaps this was what Rafe meant. Vincenzo leaned forward, his dark gaze intense. "I need your help, Isolde. The curse, it is bound to me, yes, but it also hungers for your power. I cannot face it alone. You must learn to control what is inside you, or you may become its next target." Her hands shook slightly as she clasped them together. "And if I fail," she asked softly. "Then we all face what cannot be undone," he said simply. His voice carried no threat, only the weight of truth. The fire flickered, and Isolde could swear she saw the shadows in the corners of the room shift, as though acknowledging Vincenzo's words. She felt a shiver run through her, not entirely from the cold. The air was charged, heavy with power she could feel pressing against her chest. Rafe moved closer to the fire, his eyes never leaving hers. "I will guide you," he said. "I will not let harm come to you if I can prevent it, but you must trust yourself and trust us." She looked at both men, her mind spinning. Trust was a word she rarely used. Loneliness had taught her to rely only on herself. Yet in their presence, she felt a strange, unfamiliar pull, a need for connection, for alliance, for something more. The storm outside continued its furious dance, snow lashing against the windows as though seeking entry. The shadows in the room lengthened and twisted, and Isolde felt a sudden sharp awareness. Something had arrived along with the storm, something older, darker, and unseen. "Miss Isolde," Vincenzo said suddenly, rising to his feet. His movement was smooth, commanding. "Do not be afraid, but you must see." Before she could respond, he held out his hand. A faint glow spread along his fingers, illuminating the room with a pale, otherworldly light. The shadows recoiled from him, writhing like smoke, then settled back with subtle menace. Isolde's breath caught in her throat. Rafe moved beside her, his hand brushing against hers. "It's real," he said quietly. "Everything he has said, it is real, and you are part of it whether you like it or not." Isolde's pulse raced. She felt both fear and a strange excitement, a thrill she had never experienced in her quiet, lonely life. The wind outside howled like a warning, but inside, the fire warmed her cheeks and heart. Vincenzo approached a large mirror in the room, tracing a hand along its surface. The reflection rippled, and for a moment the glass seemed to show not just the room but something beyond, dark shapes moving in the snowstorm, whispering, watching, waiting. Isolde gasped. What is that?" "The curse," Vincenzo said softly, eyes never leaving the mirror. "It has minions, creatures bound to its will. They are drawn to power, to magic, to bloodlines like mine. And now they are drawn to you." Her stomach churned. She had let strangers into her home, and now she realized the danger she had invited. Fear tried to grip her, but a stubborn, defiant spark inside her refused. She would not flee. She would face whatever this was, even if it frightened her more than she could admit. "You must learn to control it," Vincenzo said, turning to her, his dark eyes intense. "Or the next time it comes, there may be no one to protect you." Isolde's hands clenched at her sides. "Then teach me," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "I will try." Rafe nodded, a shadow of a smile flickering across his face. "Good, that is the first step. Courage comes before mastery." Vincenzo studied her for a long moment. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly, "and you are braver than I would have guessed." The shadows in the room shifted again, and Isolde felt a chill run down her spine. The air was thick with tension, heavy with unspoken threats, yet also charged with something unfamiliar, possibility and connection. The hours passed slowly, the storm showing no sign of abating. Vincenzo and Rafe began to share fragments of their past, cautiously at first, revealing pieces of a life filled with power, danger, and sacrifices they had endured. Isolde listened, fascinated, though a part of her ached at the thought of the burdens they carried. "You have known darkness," she said softly, "and yet you still fight it." Vincenzo's eyes darkened. "I fight because I must, not for power, not for fear, but because there is still a chance for something else, something better, redemption perhaps, though it is rare." Rafe's gaze softened as he looked at her. "We all carry burdens, some heavier than others, but sometimes the right person or the right moment can change everything." Isolde's heart ached with longing she did not fully understand. She had spent years alone, guarding herself from harm, from disappointment, from life itself. And now, in the firelight with two strangers who were more than they appeared, she felt the fragile stirrings of hope, of connection, and even of something resembling love. The storm raged outside, but inside the three shared an unspoken bond, fragile, tense, and powerful. It was a beginning, a step into a world she had never known existed. A world where shadows moved with intent, where curses lingered, and where the heart's desires could be as dangerous as the darkness itself. And as the fire dimmed, the wind outside finally seeming to pause for a moment, Vincenzo's hand glowed again, brighter this time. The shadows in the room shifted toward Isolde. She gasped, realizing the truth of his words. The danger was real and she was now a part of it. The storm outside had not ceased. Snow swirled against the manor walls, the wind howling like some unseen creature searching for a way inside. Isolde's hands trembled as she pressed them against the frosted glass of the window. Outside, the world was a blinding white chaos, yet her gaze kept returning to the door, knowing that whatever had knocked would arrive again. Vincenzo paced near the fire, his dark eyes reflecting the flames. The faint glow from his hand, still pulsing, seemed almost impatient, demanding action. Rafe stood beside Isolde, his calm presence grounding her, though even he could not hide the tension that crept into his shoulders. "Whatever comes through that door," Vincenzo said, his voice low but commanding, "we must face it together. You are not merely a bystander in this, Isolde. You have a role to play, and that role is important." Isolde swallowed hard. Her heart pounded in her chest. The weight of the situation was almost unbearable, yet somewhere deep within, a spark of determination ignited. She had faced loneliness, hardship, and fear before, but this was unlike anything she had imagined, and she knew that turning away now was not an option. Rafe's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, steadying her. "You have power," he said quietly, "even if you do not understand it yet. Tonight you will begin to see it for yourself." The wind outside shifted. A strange hush fell over the manor, almost as if the storm itself had paused in anticipation. And then, with a sudden crash, the door flew open, snow and ice spilling into the room. Isolde gasped, her breath visible in the icy air. Shadowy figures moved with unnatural speed, shapes that flickered between solidity and darkness. They surrounded the manor like predators, silent but intent. Vincenzo's eyes narrowed. "They are here," he said, his voice sharp. "The curse's servants, we must act quickly." Rafe moved to the center of the room, his stance protective. "Stay behind us," he said, looking at Isolde with concern. "Do not try to face them alone." The shadows surged forward. Vincenzo stepped to meet them, his glowing hand moving in smooth, controlled gestures. The shadows recoiled from the light, twisting and writhing as though burned by an invisible flame. Isolde's eyes widened. Something deep within her stirred. A warmth spread from her chest, a strange sensation that felt like fire beneath ice. Her hands tingled and instinctively she raised them. The shadows hesitated as though sensing her presence. "You can do this," Vincenzo said urgently, his dark gaze locking on hers. "Focus. Control it." Isolde took a deep breath. She had always felt magic in the quiet moments of her life, the way she could sense danger before it arrived, the way emotions sometimes shaped the air around her. Now, the feeling was stronger, more tangible. She concentrated on the warmth in her chest, letting it flow outward. A wave of energy surged from her hands. The shadows shrieked and twisted, unable to approach. The air in the room seemed to vibrate, charged with her power. Vincenzo and Rafe exchanged a glance, a mixture of surprise and approval passing between them. "You are stronger than I thought," Rafe said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. Isolde's chest heaved. She had never felt such control or such fear. The shadows, sensing their enemy, retreated to the corners of the room, hissing like wind through trees. Vincenzo stepped closer to her. "Good," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But this is only the beginning. They will return, and next time they may be stronger." Isolde nodded, her hands trembling but steady. "Then I will be ready," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. Rafe placed a hand on her arm, grounding her. "You are not alone," he said. "We will face them together." For a moment, the three stood in the flickering firelight, breathing heavily. The shadows had retreated, but the room still carried a tension that could not be ignored. Then a low, menacing voice echoed through the manor, carried by the wind. "You cannot hide from what is coming," it whispered. "The curse knows you are here, it knows her." Isolde's heart skipped. The voice was not human. It carried a weight, a threat, and something almost alive. She looked at Vincenzo. "They know me," he said quietly, his jaw tight. "And now they know you." Rafe's expression hardened. "We must prepare," he said. "The storm is no longer the only danger. The curse itself will act." Isolde felt fear clawing at her chest, but beneath it, a strange determination. She had let strangers in during a storm, and now she was part of something far larger than herself. She would not flee. She would not hide. The rest of the night was a blur of preparation. Vincenzo and Rafe worked together, fortifying the manor as best they could. Candles were placed strategically, herbs and charms set around the room, and protective symbols drawn along the walls. Every movement was precise, almost ritualistic, as if they had done this many times before. Isolde assisted where she could, her own power occasionally flaring in small bursts. She felt the energy within her responding to the presence of the curse, bending to her will with effort and concentration. Each time she succeeded, the fire in her chest burned brighter, a combination of fear, determination, and something more, something she did not yet understand. As dawn approached, the storm outside began to wane slightly, though the shadows in the room remained restless. Vincenzo and Rafe stood at opposite sides of the room, watching her carefully. "You did well tonight," Vincenzo said quietly. "But you must understand this is only the first test. The curse will not give up so easily." "I understand," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that weighed on her. "I want to learn, I want to control it." Rafe's gaze softened. "You are learning faster than we expected," he said, "but power without control can be dangerous. That is why we are here, to guide you." The morning light filtered through the snow-covered windows, casting a pale glow across the room. For a brief moment the three of them stood in silence, the storm outside fading, the shadows lingering, and the fire casting warmth on their faces. Then, a sudden sound shattered the fragile calm, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper carried through the manor. "She must belong to us, she cannot escape." Isolde froze, a chill running down her spine. She turned to Vincenzo and Rafe. "They are closing in," Vincenzo said, his voice tense. "And they are more cunning than before. We must be ready or this will end badly." Rafe placed a hand on her shoulder, firm and reassuring. "We will not let them harm you. You have grown stronger, but you are not alone. Trust in that and in yourself." The shadows began to move again, stretching along the walls, creeping closer to the firelight. Isolde felt her pulse quicken, fear and adrenaline mingling in her chest. The room was alive with tension, every corner a potential threat. And then, as if summoned by her thoughts, a new presence entered the manor, a figure cloaked in black, tall and silent, moving through the snow as though the storm itself had parted for them. Isolde's heart raced. She did not recognize the figure, yet there was a familiarity in the air, a sense of history that made her uneasy. Vincenzo's eyes narrowed. "They have found us," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Prepare yourself. This is no ordinary enemy." Rafe stepped closer to Isolde, his hand brushing hers. "Stay calm," he whispered. "We will face this together." The figure stepped closer, and Isolde could feel the energy radiating from them, powerful, cold, and relentless. The shadows in the room reacted, retreating slightly but still surrounding them like a tide ready to crash. For a moment, silence reigned. The three of them stood in the flickering firelight, aware of the danger pressing in, yet united in purpose. Isolde's chest heaved with fear and determination. She was no longer the quiet woman alone in her manor. She was a part of something larger, something dangerous, and something extraordinary. The figure spoke, their voice echoing with an authority that made the room tremble. "The time has come. The curse will have its due, and she belongs to the storm. Isolde's breath caught in her throat. The room seemed to shrink, the shadows closing in, the fire flickering wildly. Yet within her a new fire burned, fear mingled with courage, doubt mingled with determination. She looked at Vincenzo and Rafe, their faces illuminated by the glow of the fire. They were ready, and so was she. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The storm outside howled once more, the snow lashing against the walls, and the shadows pressed closer. But inside the manor, a different storm had begun. A storm of courage, power, and the fire of a heart that refused to yield. The night was long, the storm outside reduced to a ghostly whisper against the walls of the manor. Inside, the air was thick with tension, fear, and the weight of the unknown. Isolde's chest heaved as she prepared herself. Her hands glowed faintly, the energy within her responding to the presence of the cloaked figure and the shadows that had pressed closer than ever before. Vincenzo and Rafe stood on either side of her, pillars of strength and protection. Vincenzo's dark eyes gleamed with determination, while Rafe's calm, focused gaze offered reassurance. The three of them formed a circle of power, united in purpose, and yet the unknown threat before them cast a shadow over every heartbeat. The cloaked figure raised a hand, and the shadows surged forward like a living wave. Isolde's instincts took over. She focused on the warmth inside her chest, the fire beneath ice that had appeared the night she first opened the door. Slowly, steadily, she pushed the energy outward, creating a barrier that held back the shadows. Vincenzo stepped forward, his glowing hand weaving through the air. Dark tendrils of energy bent to his will, striking the shadows and dispersing them. "Hold them," he commanded, his voice low but forceful. "Do not let them reach us." Rafe moved with precision, his every movement calculated. He directed the smaller, weaker shadows away from Isolde, giving her space to concentrate. "Keep your focus," he said. "You are stronger than you think, but you must not falter now." The room shuddered as the shadows pressed harder, swirling and twisting, trying to break through their defenses. Isolde's vision blurred, but she gritted her teeth and held her ground. A warmth spread from her heart outward, connecting her to Vincenzo and Rafe. She could feel their strength mingling with hers, forming a force far greater than the sum of its parts. The cloaked figure stepped closer, their aura dark and oppressive. "You cannot resist," the figure said, voice echoing like wind through empty halls. "The curse will claim her and you will fall with it." Vincenzo's jaw tightened. "We do not yield," he said sharply. "Not now, not ever." The figure laughed, a chilling sound that reverberated through the manor. Shadows twisted into shapes more solid, more menacing, and lunged forward. Isolde's hands flared with light, her magic responding instinctively to their threat. The shadows hissed and shrieked, unable to cross the barrier she created. Rafe's voice cut through the chaos. "Now, Isolde, push your power outward." She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. She imagined the warmth inside her growing, expanding, filling the room, reaching every corner and connecting with Vincenzo and Rafe. The energy pulsed, bright and steady, and the shadows faltered, recoiling from the force of her power. Vincenzo moved forward, his own energy surging. The glow from his hand intensified, striking the shadows with precision and control. "Together," he shouted. "All of us now." The three of them focused, their powers intertwining. The shadows screamed, twisting in agony as the force pressed against them. Isolde felt exhaustion creeping in, but she ignored it. She could sense the heart of the curse, a dark presence that had lingered around Vincenzo for years, and now it was drawn to her. You are not ready," the cloaked figure said, their voice trembling slightly. "You cannot wield such power." "I am ready," Isolde said firmly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I will protect this place. I will protect us." A final wave of energy surged outward from her. The shadows writhed violently, then began to dissolve, pulled into a vortex of light and warmth. The cloaked figure staggered back, the darkness around them breaking apart. Vincenzo and Rafe pressed the advantage, their energy striking in harmony with hers. The figure let out a cry, fading into the shadows, leaving only a lingering sense of menace. The room grew quiet, the tension slowly dissolving. The fire flickered warmly in the hearth, casting gentle light over the three of them. Isolde sank to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Her hands trembled and her chest heaved, yet she smiled faintly. We did it," she whispered. Vincenzo knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Yes," he said softly, his dark eyes meeting hers. "You were remarkable, stronger than I could have imagined." Rafe moved to her other side, his hand brushing hers reassuringly. "You have learned to control it," he said, "and you have saved all of us. You are no longer just you. You are part of something greater." Isolde looked at both men, the warmth in her chest growing, not just from the magic, but from the bond they had forged. They had come as strangers, drawn by the storm, but now they were something far more. Allies, protectors, and perhaps something deeper. Vincenzo's hand lingered over hers, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. "Isolde," he said quietly, "I did not expect to find this, to feel this, but now I cannot deny it. You are important to me, more than I ever thought possible." Her heart skipped and she felt the same pull, the same connection. I feel it too," she admitted softly. "Even from the beginning when you arrived. I could not understand it, but now I do." Rafe watched them, his expression calm but thoughtful. "Love, or something like it, can grow even in the most dangerous places," he said. "It is powerful but also fragile. Protect it as fiercely as you protect each other." The morning light began to filter through the snow-laden windows, casting a pale glow over the room. The storm outside had ended, leaving only the soft crunch of melting snow against the earth. For the first time in many nights, Isolde felt calm. The shadows were gone, the curse had been challenged, and the warmth of friendship and something more filled the manor. Vincenzo stood, offering a hand to help her up. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice low but resolute. "The curse may return in some form, but we will face it together, always." Isolde rose, gripping his hand firmly. "I will not run," she said. "Not anymore. I am ready to face whatever comes as long as we face it together." Rafe nodded in agreement. "And I will be there," he said quietly, "beside you both, protecting, guiding whatever is needed." The three of them stood together, the manor warm and safe, the sunlight spilling over the walls and a sense of hope settling in the air. It was a new beginning, born from danger and fear, yet strengthened by courage and trust. For Isolde, it was more than survival. It was transformation. She had opened her door to strangers during a storm, and in doing so, she had opened her heart to possibilities she had never imagined. She had discovered strength, courage, and power within herself, and in the hearts of the two men who had become her companions, her allies, and perhaps her family. The shadows had been defeated, but their presence left a lingering lesson, that even in the darkest moments light could shine, courage could grow, and love, fragile but strong, could flourish in places most unexpected. Vincenzo turned to her, his hand still holding hers. "You have changed everything," he said softly, "not just for me but for us all." Isolde smiled faintly, feeling warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with magic. "And you have changed me," she said. "I was afraid, so afraid. But now I see that fear is not the end. It is only the beginning." Rafe placed a hand over his heart, a quiet acknowledgement of her words. "The storm brought us together," he said, "and whatever comes next, we will face it as one." The sun rose fully, melting the last of the snow and scattering the remnants of the storm. Light filled the manor, warm and golden, reflecting off the walls and the polished floors. It was a new day, a day of promise, and a day that would be remembered for the courage, the magic, and the bonds formed in the heart of a blizzard. Isolde looked at Vincenzo and Rafe, her heart swelling with gratitude, hope, and a growing affection she could no longer deny. They had come as strangers, mysterious and powerful. And now they were her family, her allies, and her companions in a world that was larger, darker, and more beautiful than she had ever imagined. The storm was over, but their story was only beginning.